Today is Friday, July 24th, 2026, and today is National Drive-Thru Day, which celebrates one of humanity's most efficient arrangements, receiving food without having to find a parking space, or put on anything more respectable than whatever you were already wearing in the car. And looking at today's stories, all of them involve moments when the familiar version of events suddenly changed. A queen was ordered to surrender the crown she had worn since infancy. An ancient city became internationally famous after being shown to someone who supposedly discovered it. And a baseball player hit a home run that counted, then didn't, and eventually counted again. Welcome to Wait, That's Random, This Day in History. I'm C.L. Burns, voice actor, audiobook narrator, and a person who keeps discovering that history is somehow both fascinating and deeply concerning at the same time. Mary Stuart became Queen of Scotland when she was just 6 days old. Her father, King James V, died in December 1542, leaving an infant to inherit a kingdom already divided by political rivalries and religious conflict. Since Mary was clearly too young to rule, Scotland was governed in her name while competing factions argued over the country's future, and hers. Much of Mary's childhood was spent in France, where she was raised in the royal court and eventually married Francis, the heir to the French throne. When Francis became king in 1552, Mary became queen consort of France while remaining Scotland's queen in her own right. For a brief time, she wore 2 crowns. Then Francis died in 1560, leaving Mary widowed at 18. She returned to Scotland the following year and found the country very different from the one she had left behind. Mary was Catholic, but the Scottish Reformation had made Protestantism increasingly powerful. Religious disagreement was tangled together with political ambition, and nearly every decision she made became part of a larger struggle over who should control Scotland. Her second marriage made everything worse. In 1565, Mary married her cousin Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. He was handsome, well-connected, and possessed his own claim to the English throne. But the marriage quickly deteriorated. Darnley resented that Mary would not grant him greater political power. Mary increasingly distrusted him. Then in 1566, Darnley took part in the murder of David Rizzo, Mary's private secretary, who was dragged from her presence and stabbed repeatedly inside Holy Rod Place. Less than a year later, Darnley himself was dead. The house where he had been staying was destroyed by an explosion in February of 1567. His body was discovered outside, apparently strangled or suffocated rather than killed by the blast. Suspicion quickly fell on James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, and by association on Mary. Bothwell was tried and acquitted, but the proceedings were widely considered suspicious. Then Mary married him only a few months after Darnley's death. Whether she chose the marriage freely, was coerced into it, or believed it offered her the best chance of political survival remains debated. Whatever the truth, many Scottish nobles saw the marriage as proof that Mary could no longer be trusted. They raised an army against her. After a confrontation at Carberry Hill, Mary surrendered and was taken to Loch Leven Castle, where she was imprisoned on an island in the middle of a lake. Then, on July 24, 1567, the Queen was presented with documents giving up her throne. Mary initially resisted, but she had little real choice. Isolated, surrounded by enemies, and reportedly threatened with death if she refused, she signed the abdication papers. The crown passed to her 1-year-old son, James VI. Mary had become queen before she could speak. 24 years later, she was forced to surrender the title with the stroke of a pen. Her story didn't end at Loch Leven. She escaped the following year, attempted to regain power, and eventually fled to England, where she hoped Queen Elizabeth I would protect her. Instead, Mary spent nearly 19 years in captivity before being executed in 1587. There is something unsettling about a person spending an entire life surrounded by crowns and still having remarkably little control over her own future. And control, especially control over how history tells a story, is also at the heart of what happened in Peru more than 3 centuries later. On July 24, 1911, Yale history lecturer Hiram Bingham climbed into the mountains above Peru's Urubamba Valley, searching for traces of the Inca past. What he encountered would eventually become one of the most recognizable archaeological sites on Earth. But he did not stumble across a place no living person knew existed. Local people showed him the way. Bingham had traveled to Peru hoping to locate Vilcabamba, the final refuge of the Inca resistance following the Spanish conquest. While moving through the Urubamba Valley, he heard about ruins high on a nearby ridge. A local farmer and innkeeper named Melchor Artiga agreed to guide him toward the mountain. After crossing the river and beginning a steep climb through cold rain and dense vegetation, Bingham reached families farming on terraces near the ruins. A young boy named Pablito Ricard then led him through the overgrowth. What appeared beneath it was extraordinary. Stone buildings, stairways, terraces, temples, and walls had been fitted together with remarkable precision along a narrow ridge surrounded by towering green mountains. Bingham immediately understood that the site was important, but he was not its discoverer in the way the story was often told. Families lived and farmed nearby. Local residents knew the ruins were there. An inscription reportedly left at the site by Agustin Lizarraga showed that he had visited Machu Picchu in 1902, 9 years before Bingham arrived. What Bingham possessed was not exclusive knowledge of the place. He possessed the connections and resources to introduce it to a much larger audience. He returned with expeditions, supported by Yale University and the National Geographic Society. Vegetation was cleared, structures were studied, photographs were taken, and a special 1913 issue of National Geographic presented Machu Picchu to readers around the world. Bingham initially believed that he might have found Vilcabamba. Later research showed that he was wrong. Machu Picchu was probably built during the 15th century, possibly as a royal estate associated with the Inca Emperor Pachacuti, although its precise purpose remains debated. The site became globally famous anyway. Today, Machu Picchu is recognized as one of the world's greatest archaeological treasures. Bingham's work played a major role in creating that international attention. But telling the complete story means remembering the people who already knew the mountain and guided him there. Sometimes history remembers the person who brings a story to the world more readily than the people who quietly kept that story alive. And sometimes the official version of what happened doesn't survive for very long at all. On July 24, 1983, the Kansas City Royals were playing the New York Yankees at Yankee Stadium. The Royals trailed 4-3 with 2 outs in the top of the 9th inning. UL Washington stood at first base, and Yankees closer Goose Gossage was 1 out away from ending the game. That brought George Brett to the plate. Brett was one of baseball's best hitters, but Gossage was one of its most intimidating pitchers. With the count at 1-1 strike, Gossage threw a fastball that Brett drove into the right field seats. A 2-run home run. The Royals now led 5-4. At least, they did for the moment. While Brett celebrated in the dugout, Yankees manager Billy Martin calmly walked toward home plate and asked the umpires to examine Brett's bat. The problem was pine tar. Pine tar is a sticky substance hitters apply to their bats to improve their grip. Brett's bat had plenty of it, far more than the rules appeared to allow. The rule said pine tar could not extend more than 18 inches from the handle. Home plate umpire Tim McClellan laid the bat across the 17-inch width of home plate, examined the dark coating, and decided it exceeded the limit. Then he walked toward the Royals dugout and signaled that Brett was out. The home run disappeared. The game was over. The Yankees had won. And George Brett came charging out of the dugout as though someone had just fired him from a cannon. His eyes were wide. His arms were flailing. His face had turned bright red. Teammates and coaches struggled to restrain him as he screamed at McClellan. It became one of the most recognizable outbursts in sports history. Brett wasn't simply angry because an umpire had questioned his bat. He had just hit a go-ahead home run off one of baseball's greatest relief pitchers, only to watch it erased after he had already returned to the dugout. The Royals formally protested the decision. American League President Lee MacPhail reviewed the rule and concluded that the umpires had applied it incorrectly. The restriction was intended to prevent unnecessary damage to baseballs. not to give the defense a way to erase a home run after it had been hit. MacPhail restored Brett's home run and ordered the game resumed from the point immediately after. That created a wonderfully strange situation. The teams had to return to Yankee Stadium nearly a month later just to finish the final 4 outs. The Yankees attempted another challenge, arguing that Brett might not have touched every base during his home run trot. But the umpires arrived prepared with signed statements from the original crew confirming that he had. Yankees manager Billy Martin then made the resumed game even stranger by placing pitcher Ron Garrity in center field and left-handed first baseman Don Mattingly at second base. After all that preparation, the actual time it took to finish the game was about 9 minutes. Neither team scored again, and Kansas City won 5-4. The home run counted after all. Brett went on to have a Hall of Fame career, collecting more than 3,000 hits, winning 3 batting titles, and spending all 21 of his major league seasons with Kansas City. But for millions of people, the first image that comes to mind is still George Brett flying out of the dugout while an umpire holds a suspiciously sticky baseball bat. It's funny how one object can become permanently connected to one person. For Brett, it was a pine tar covered bat. For today's birthday, it was a golden lasso. Lynda Carter was born on July 24, 1951 in Phoenix, Arizona. Long before she became a television icon, Carter wanted to sing. She made her public musical debut in a talent show when she was 5, performed with bands as a teenager, and eventually toured from Las Vegas to the Catskills. Music wasn't a side interest she discovered after becoming famous. It was her original ambition. In 1972, Carter won the Miss World USA pageant and represented the United States at the international competition. Then she moved to Los Angeles, studied acting, and began auditioning for television roles. A few years later, she was cast as Diana Prince and her superhero alter ego in Wonder Woman. The decision came with plenty of risk. Studio executives weren't convinced that a television series led by a female superhero would attract a large audience. Carter helped prove them wrong. The program premiered in 1975, and her portrayal quickly became the version of Wonder Woman an entire generation recognized. She brought strength to the character, but she also gave her warmth, intelligence, compassion, and a quiet sense of humor. That balance mattered. Carter understood that Wonder Woman wasn't powerful simply because she could stop bullets or lift impossible objects. Her real strength came from choosing empathy when cruelty would have been easier. The series ran for 3 seasons and transformed Carter into a cultural icon. But it also created the kind of association that can overwhelm everything else an actor does. Carter never abandoned the rest of her career. She released music, performed in Las Vegas, and produced and starred in several television variety specials. She appeared in films, television movies, and series including Hawkeye and Supergirl. She also provided voices for several popular video games and eventually returned to the Wonder Woman universe with a cameo in Wonder Woman 1984. Beyond entertainment, Carter has used her public platform to advocate for women, medical research, and the creation of the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum. She received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2018. More than 4 decades after first putting on the famous costume. What I appreciate about Lynda Carter's career is that she never seemed embarrassed by the role that made her famous. She embraced it. At the same time, she continued reminding people that the woman wearing the costume had her own music, interests, convictions, and story. And while looking back at everything we explored today, I kept thinking about how much power belongs to the person or institution allowed to declare what officially happened. Scottish nobles forced Mary to sign away the crown she had held since infancy. Hiram Bingham became famous for discovering a place local residents already knew. An umpire erased George Brett's home run before a league president restored it. And Lynda Carter took a character other people had created and made that character feel real to millions of viewers. History isn't merely a record of what happened. It's also a record of who was allowed to define what happened, and how that definition changed once someone looked more closely. Anyway, if I ever manage to hit a go-ahead home run at Yankee Stadium, I'm checking the bat before I leave the dugout. I don't know how I got into the game, but I'm not letting pine tar ruin this for me. And since today has been full of people discovering that the familiar version of a story was never the whole story, Lynda Carter once described the moment Wonder Woman became something larger than a television character. She is real. She lives and she breathes. I know this because she lives in me. If you'd like to explore more of my work, books, narration, or ongoing historical curiosity, you can find it all at waitthat'srandom.com. I'm C.L. Burns, and I'm glad you were here for this one. I'll see you tomorrow.